Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? If you recall, not so long ago, I made a video about the D20 not being swingy, but in it, I talked about the idea that when somebody commented on an old video of mine and called it swingy, at first I misunderstood what they meant. And when I asked them a clarifying question, I realized, oh yes, they mean something completely different. So this video is going to tackle that a little bit. The commenter was 007ohboy. And I should say before I go on that there's been some great activity on some of the podcasts by Diegetic Advancement, which is Riley Lum. They talk a little bit more about dice mechanics. And let's see what else. Spencer on Keep Off the Borderlands had a really interesting video as well. I want to kind of respond to some of the things they said, but not today. This video is not about that. So what 007ohboy was really talking about was this idea that a very skilled character, what'll happen is if you roll too many times, if you roll the D20 over and over again, that it'll be too swingy. They will have some failures that just don't make any sense. And they even mentioned that maybe if we use some different dice mechanics, this might, change it. But that's not the case. It's not about the dice mechanic. It's more about player error. And how are you actually doing this? When I say player error, I mean all players, including the game master. So let's back up a little bit. Way back when, we were exposed, or some of us people that, are of an age, were exposed to games where it told us, if somebody comes up to a door, roll a D6 to see if they can open it. When this happens, roll again. When they're having an interaction with an NPC, roll on this encounter table and a reaction table, see what happens. We kind of got programmed a little bit to roll dice an awful lot. And I think what happened was very often we took his advice a little bit too much to heart and rolled too much in those games, and then exported that mindset or culture of play to games where it really wasn't appropriate, and we just did it anyway and rolled dice an awful lot. There are other ways to determine if somebody succeeds or fails, or what else might happen, which I'll get into a second. And very often what happened in a lot of games is you'd have games, in fact, some of the games that are the most infamous or most villainized for having, characters fail to be able to drive their own car and all this kind of stuff, are the ones that have the clearest instructions somewhere in the game telling you, this is when you should roll dice, and this is when you shouldn't roll dice. And I'm not going to go into every single game, but very often, many games will have a little section talking about what's actually called karma. Now I'll get to that in a second, but just hold that in your head for a second. They'll have you look at the actual competence of the individual in question and say, okay, well, with a score of this, they're going to be able to do all these things. And in fact, they should be able to do all these things unless circumstances are kind of dire, unless they're under some kind of time pressure, unless something's going on where they're maybe they don't have the correct tools, maybe they don't have the right environment, and now they're going to have to make a roll to see if they're able to do this or not. And that's even before considering any sort of modifiers for those unfortunate circumstances. So a lot of games will have that in there. And so the heart surgeon that 007 was talking about, they don't need to roll dice to do heart surgery, unless they're doing it in a bunker while they're being shelled by the enemy. And then maybe they might need to roll some dice to even do some minor surgery, because it might be a little bit difficult. Maybe they don't even have the right kind of thread. You get the idea. A lot of games have that built in. But let's back up a little bit more, because that really is the player and game master error at that point, is you're rolling for things over and over again when you really shouldn't be. You're free to use karma in a lot of those situations. So what do I mean by that, really? There was a game, which I have not played, so I just want to make that clear. It's called Everway. It was by Jonathan Tweet. And it did not invent this idea, but it gave them names. The idea that, for the most part, there are 3 different ways that we make decisions about what happens, what's the outcome of an event, maybe just what happens in general, or maybe, the action we take in the first place. And those he called karma, fortune, and drama. Fortune is the one that we're most familiar with. We're talking about dice, right? The idea that you roll dice to see what happens. So when that character uses its skill X, we roll dice, see what happens. That's using fortune, because we don't know. It's luck, and it doesn't matter what dice mechanic you're using. It's luck, kids. I hate to tell you. The next one, which we talked about a little bit, is the idea of karma. You look at this character's stats, you look at their ability, and you determine, well, in this particular situation, this is generally a game master call, they succeed or they fail. The last thing is drama. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, is the idea that the decision is made. What happens here? Let's just talk about an outcome of an attempt. Let's say the game master decides what's going to happen based on what would be dramatic. What would happen if they fail here? What would happen if they succeed here? And so the decision about the outcome of that attempt is made based on dramatic reasons. Now we can back up a little bit and look at what game masters do and just, determine like what are they, how are they deciding how to do this? Is it, once again, is it fortune? Is there a random table? Is there something where they're not sure what happens? Are they using the mechanics of the game? I played in a game ran by Anthony Runeslinger, and a staircase collapsed under all of our weight. And, afterwards he said, well, I rolled dice. It was a rickety staircase. I knew it might happen, but I wasn't sure. So he used fortune to determine what happened in that particular event. Then there's always the idea of karma. Well, that's a weak staircase. Oh, yeah, that many people on it, it's going to collapse. Or drama. It'd be really cool if the staircase collapsed right now. Wouldn't that cause a pickle? There's various ways that a game master could make a decision about what happens. But what about us? And when I say us, I mean, what about you and I as a player? Once again, we can use that very same system to determine what our actions are going to be. Maybe there's some kind of fear mechanic in a game, or we're playing Alien and we're getting more and more wigged out by things. And so there's a certain extent of fortune determining what our actions are going to be, or at least it narrows our possible actions, right? It could very well be drama. We decide that we're going to do something, or something's going to happen if we're playing one of those games where the talking stick and the reality really is kind of in a bit of a tug of war. And we decide, what, this is going to happen for a dramatic reason. I will do this for a dramatic reason. There was that example I brought up in Circle of Hands quite some time ago now. We need to play the last venture, by the way, where I made a decision as this character, Ingolf, I believe it was, and I made a decision based upon what he would do in that situation, which I'm going to get to because this is important. And the author of the game had mentioned that he would have rather I done something different. I could have thrown this chalice through this glass window. In fact, I thought about it. But had I done that, it would have been for dramatic reasons. I opted against it. And instead, I used karma. What do I mean? Well, you can kind of broaden this idea of karma because, at least to me, the idea of karma is pretty much, okay, this is what you got. What's probably going to happen? In a case like that, I knew who this character Ingolf was. I knew what motivated him. And so I made a decision on what I would do based upon who he was. For a very real extent, if I can talk here, I used the idea of karma to determine what would happen, if you allow me to be so broad. Which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because role-playing games are about making decisions all the time. We can even look at say, a reaction of an NPC. And, you walk up to your ex-lover. You haven't seen this person in quite some time. The game master can decide what happens various different ways. They can roll the reaction table, right? The NPC slaps you because they rolled really lousy. You roll a 2 on a 2d12. I think that's a bad reaction, if I recall correctly. They could decide that the person slaps your face because that's a dramatic moment, right? Or they could decide that, maybe you walk up to that character, you're really quite rude to them. The game master knows that you've had a past, and now you're being really kind of a jerk to this person, and they slap you across the face. And you could say, this is done because of karma. You've pretty much set yourself up for that in that case. So interesting stuff. At the end of the day, to answer 007ohboy's question way back when, I believe it's not really the dice mechanic that matters in that case. It's a matter of, very often we don't use karma as much as we should. We don't look at, very often the games are telling us, do this. And, you look at how good the character is, how bad the character is, and you make a decision then. And you save the dice rolls for when it's really dire and they have things are against them. And it's much more important. Much more important dramatically. Much more important because, it's much more difficult now. Those are various decisions we make. How about that?